everybody to be on your very best P's and Q's this morning. You can see Bob Allen back there is recording everything. So if you decide that you're going to give me any kind of rhetoric that I do not deserve, just remember that it is going to be recorded for posterity. So Bob, thank you. Make sure, what did I say? Posterior? What? Posterior. Posterior. My posterior. Which my wife says you can show a movie on it, so. Tends to grow and shrink, depending on age and how much I had to drink the night before. Yeah, but not right now. Keep it clean, there you go. All right, so I'm going to ask Bill Hicks to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Bill, if you'd be so kind.
Ready, begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Bill. All right, so let me give you a couple of brief updates here of what's going on. So I told you about Bob's back there. Let's see, in case you saw a strange face out front, you didn't see Michelle out there. She, as you recall, after our last Waterwise breakfast in Thousand Oaks, the very next day, she gave birth to a beautiful bouncing boy, which what was 7 pounds, 7 ounces, and he looks like the father. Babies all look the same now anyways, but we'll get the DNA later on. Find out for sure. Well, you're the one who said he's hardly ever home, so he's a fireman, you know, he works a lot of time. So anyways, Michelle, being as dedicated as she is, waited until the day after Waterwise to have her baby on all planned out. So she's a dedicated person. Anyway, give her a raise or something. Let her know what you think about it. All right, so we have coming up, oh no, this is today. What's the next, there's nothing here coming up, Kelly, I don't have anything. Oh, here it is. Got the workshop. I'm sorry, I was looking in the wrong place. So mark your calendars, important safety notice coming up. The hazmat confined space awareness training will be Tuesday, June 23rd at the Wedgwood. And register early because classroom space is very limited. All right, having said that, I gotta do a few introductions here. I know you guys all hate it, and gals all hate this, but you know what? They like to be introduced. So what can I do? All right, so starting with the Waterwise VIPs, we have Fran Farina from Senator Jackson's office. Fran's back there in the corner eating her breakfast. John Bryson with Assembly Member Jackie Irwin's office. There's John at. Right there, all right. And Pam Campo. How do you I know you spell. How do you pronounce it?
Campo.
Campo. Yeah. With Assemblyman Scott Wilkes' office. So we're happy to have you here. There's a few AWA directors. We'll just go through this real fast. Council Member Neil Andrews with the City of Ventura. Al Fox with Campo Rosa Water District. Keith Moore with the Port Hueneme Water Agency. I heard you guys had a real fun night last night. Tom Slauson with Callegas Municipal Water District and Jim Ward with Casitas Municipal Water District. And one last one here. Council Member Jim Hensley with the City of Port Hueneme. Oh, these are Waterwise. Jim Hensley with the City of Port Hueneme. Council Member Andrews. So that's Neil Andrews. With the City of Ventura. Jeez. Yeah, you know it's not all good. You all know because you got to sit here and listen to me try and work my way through this, and you know you'd rather be headed to work. Let's see. AWA Board Alternates, Jim Hensley with the city of Fort Hueneme, Bill Hicks with Casitas, Jim Kentosh, which always just miners of Water District, Jay's.
Put on your glasses.
You can't see a goddamn thing when you're down. So listen, let me tell you a little story here. Forget the rest of the introductions. They don't care. You don't care any more than anybody
We
else.
forgot Mike Morgan.
Well, I am not done with them yet. All right, so I got Mike Morgan, City of Camarillo, and I got Tony Tremblay with Music Peeler and Garrett, and Jay Spoogren. Sturgeon. Jay Sturgeon from the City of Thousand Oaks. All right, so welcome all of you. Story here about four ladies, four friends that had been together for quite a while, and they kind of had a reunion after 30 years, and so they all got together in one of the person's homes, and one of the lady who was hosting the event said, you know what, I'm going to go get some food for you guys, so while I'm in there, talk just like you do here at Waterwise before the program starts. So, the first lady says, you know, I have to tell you how well my son has done. He's studying economics, he's done really, really well. He's a banker, and he is so rich that he gave his best friend a Ferrari. And the other lady says, well, number two lady, the other one says, you know what, well, I can outdo that. She says, my son did very, very well. He's a pilot, and he's done so well, he gave his friend a jet plane. The third lady says, I can even outdo that. My son is an engineer. Maybe not in water issues, but certainly an engineer. And he's done very well, and he built this big, magnificent house, and he gave it away to his friend. So the lady comes back with food, and says, oh, this is interesting, so what's going on? And she says, well, we were talking about all of our sons. What about your son? She said, well, my son is gay, he works in a gay bar. Not that that's a bad thing. And the other lady says, well, you know, that must be very disappointing for you about, you know, the way your son turned out. And she said, oh, no, not really. He has some really good friends. Last week for his birthday, he got a Ferrari, a plane, and a brand new home. All right. I'll give credit where credit's due. That's courtesy of you four. All right. Where were we? So now we got a speaker. We have a very good speaker this morning. Kelly, who's our speaker? Caitlin Matthew Jenner, Caitlin. Who's our speaker? Oh, that one says hazmat confined. Where's this thing at, Kelly? Matthew Fina? Fine. Where is he?
That's the first time.
Where is Matthew? What are you sitting back there for? Get out here! You're a speaker. Well, you know it's going to be right. Economics and economists. Center for Economic Research and Forecasting at Cal Lutheran University. Do we have a water supply problem or a water demand problem? And that's it, right? Is there any biography about yourself you want me to say?
We can all go to work early.
Thank you all for being here. There's no new members or anything this morning? Going out.
We got the name pronounced right now, let's see if the technology. All right. So, my name is Matthew. Obviously, I'm an economist at California Lutheran University. I will teach graduate econometrics, so the use of statistical tools. So I deal a lot in data and using data to answer questions about and tell stories about the economy. I'm also, by training, an environmental economist, so my dissertation looks at the effects of land use policy and also groundwater management policy. Now, I have to admit, as an economist, as a practitioner of the so-called dismal science, there's just so many issues in economics around which, frankly, we're all very cynical as a profession. Whether it's poverty, economic mobility, just about any other environmental issue besides water. Either there just doesn't seem to be any solution, or, as is the case, did you know the first law of economists? Does anybody know this? For every economist, there's an equal and opposite economist. Now, surely this guy knows the second law of economics. Second law?
No. What did I know?
They're both wrong.
No, they're both wrong.
So, nonetheless, either there don't seem to be solutions, or there seem to be equal and opposite solutions, or the worst is we have a solution, but the trade-offs are just unbearably painful. And this is true in so many avenues of economic policymaking. But with water, I can actually stand up here and say I'm truly optimistic and the reason for that is because we actually have systems of allocation here in California, a couple of them, not many. We have systems in other states like Oregon and Colorado, Nebraska, Kansas, Wyoming, and then we have a marvel of a system in Australia. So we have solutions to look to in the water issue to give us guidance on how we can solve not just the current shortage, but chronic water shortages in the state. And then lastly, the truth is in Ventura County, I hope to touch on today, is the road getting from here to there is actually shorter and less troublesome, just because of some of the unique characteristics of the county. So I just want to start on a point of optimism. Ed Gutierrez, who knows me, knows this is probably the first time I've ever started a talk on a point of optimism, but that's really how I feel about water. And so what I want to do, though, is I frame the conversation, is I want to point out, I wish this were my quote, this is another economist, I want to point out that there's a big difference between a drought and a water shortage, and we really need to confront that difference in order to really form lasting, sustainable solutions. So nature creates a drought, but man makes a shortage. So this is what a drought looks like. Okay, this is obviously from Tony Morgan and his crew. And a drought just means there hasn't been much precipitation. We're now in our 4th year of well below average rainfall. If we look to the Sierra Nevada, this was a year ago when we thought things couldn't possibly get worse. Right, 23% of the normal snowpack. Well, wait a year. Boy, wouldn't we like to have 23% of the normal snowpack. We were down to 4% as of April 15th. So this just means we haven't gotten much precipitation. Now that's totally different than a water shortage, because a water shortage means that we haven't balanced the demand for water, how much water we're consuming, with the supply of water. Right? And the truth is, this is a balancing act we do with every scarce resource known to man. Right? Whether it's gasoline, my personal favorite, coffee beans, but we use an economic mechanism, usually a price mechanism, to coordinate the demand, to send signals to consumers, to tell them what the state of supply is, and to coordinate their demand. And the reality is we don't do anything like that in water. Right? So a water shortage, this is a symptom of that. All right? So this was a year ago. You've all seen these numbers before, but reservoir levels were well below that red line is normal averages for the year. Okay, this year they actually got a little better at the end of the winter in February, because what little snowfall we got melted because of really warm temperatures in January. In fact, I skied on my 40th birthday in Mammoth at the end of January, and it poured rain. We got an inch of water on the mountain at 11,000 feet. So that filled aquifers and actually made it seem a little bit like maybe reservoir levels were doing better. But the truth is, now there's a tremendous strain on this because all of the snow is gone. And this is another important symptom of water shortage. So this is right here, the Forebay Basin. And that red line, I'm told, is approximately sea level. So as aquifer levels drop below that red line, we actually start to get saltwater intrusion into the aquifer. And I'm here to argue that that is a symptom of water shortage, not of a drought. And here's another one. Right, boy, if there's ever evidence that that we don't coordinate demand and supply, I would encourage you to look at Hillsborough and Westborough on the west side, on the left-hand side of this diagram. So these are communities that are just a couple miles apart on Highway 280 in the San Francisco Bay Area. And quite remarkably, these are residential communities. It's not like one of these is an industrial area and one's a residential area. But Hillsborough uses 6 times the per capita water of its neighbor just on the other side of Highway 280. Another one that I don't have a diagram of is we send about 500,000 tons of alfalfa a year. We package it on tanker ships, representing 100 billion gallons of water, and we send that to Asia, right? And that to me tells me we are not coordinating demand for water with the available supply. So much of the problem here, I think, lies in the way that water is allocated currently, in the current system, and the existing system of rights. So quickly, the principal right in California is the overlying or riparian right, and it's very closely associated with the ownership of land. So if you own the land, if you're not in a city, you actually have the right to reasonable and beneficial use of that water under your land. So if you're an agricultural landowner, you can pump water out of an aquifer. If you own water along a stream, you can pump that water and use that to your economic benefit. But what's really interesting in this principal water right is that it only extends to the property boundary. You cannot transfer or sell your overlying or riparian right to anyone else. So for example, and actually I'll talk about the second layer, the appropriative right is defined by law as the surplus to the reasonable and beneficial use of the primary rights holders. The appropriative right here can be owned by cities, it can be owned by people whose land is not associated with a body of water. And this is really where most of the restrictions that we're seeing come down from Sacramento are applying. They're applying to this appropriative right. And this is where we're seeing allocations being cut dramatically. In some cases, there are agricultural irrigation districts in the San Joaquin Valley who are getting 0% allocation this year. And that's their appropriative right. They can go back to pumping water when that appropriative right is removed if they happen to have water under them. And really, this system, I think, has a lot to do explaining the problems in California and the chronic water shortage that we face. So this is just a little simple illustration of that. So if you're a landowner, this could be a stream running between 2 farms. This could also be an aquifer underneath it. But if you own the land, you need only put a straw in the ground and you can begin pumping water to produce economic benefit for yourself. So water is removed, turned into agricultural products. And as I mentioned, we allow agricultural users of water to package water in the most elaborate packaging system we can imagine. Strawberries, alfalfa, soybeans, and then we allow them to sell that. Okay? And again, make no mistake, they are in the water business. What they're selling is their water. Now what's ironic is we make them go through this elaborate contortion of turning the water into something else before we let them sell it. So for example, an alfalfa grower, to produce the greatest economic benefit from the water associated with their land, can grow alfalfa and sell it to China because water is so expensive in China. It doesn't make any economic sense to grow alfalfa there. But they cannot fallow their acreage and sell their water to the city of San Francisco. So from their perspective, their rational economic incentive is to turn as much water into alfalfa as they can if that's how they can get the best economic benefit. Now, the system seems to work just fine in sustained periods of above average precipitation. Aquifers refill, streams and reservoirs refill. The problem is the increasing number of straws in the ground in the stream. And I really want to focus just for a second on the 3 uses of water that have to be managed in any sustainable system that ends water shortages. And so the headline number that you hear in the newspaper all the time is this one. Agriculture uses 80% of the water in the state, and urban users use 20%. And it's true that on average, there is a ratio there of 4 to 1 between ag and urban use. But I think this number is deeply misleading because there's a very important category of water use that has to be managed as part of any sustainable system. So this is from the California Department of Water Resources. They actually say that 50% of all water in the state is allocated towards environmental use. So this means we might curtail withdrawals from streams. We might mandate releases from dams. This is happening in Lake Cachuma in Santa Barbara County right now. 10 acre-feet of water a day has to be released from the Bradbury Dam to support migrating fish populations. And in fact, the era of environmental water use really began in the 90s. 1992, the Central Valley Project Improvement Act actually allocated 76% of the water in the San Francisco Bay Delta to environmental use. So that 76% cannot be touched. That represents 1.2 million acre-feet of water for environmental use. And again, on average, that's about 2.4 million households' annual water consumption. So any approach has to balance use between these three. And the truth is, the debate that I've been hearing in the newspaper and in Sacramento is really about the tension between agriculture and urban use. But really, we have tension between three systems. Now, this current allocation system, again, works in times of abundant water. But in the case of a drought, we have real problems, right? As I mentioned, that alfalfa grower's rationally economic decision is to use as much water to produce alfalfa as possible, because that's the only way that that individual can create economic benefit. Now, as aquifer levels and reservoir levels drop, we have in economics what we call the classic common pool problem. Everyone is drawing from the same source. There was a movie once where you may remember the line, "I drink your milkshake," right? Where you pump oil from here and you're actually taking the oil from somebody else. This is There Will Be Blood, the movie. You take somebody else's oil. Well, the same thing happens with water. And if you know aquifer levels are dropping, again, and you know that the only thing you're allowed to do with water is use it or lose it, then your economically rational choice is to pump it to the bottom before the next guy does. Right? And so we've created a system of incentives in water allocation that nearly ensures water shortage. So when things get tough, the incentives are actually aligned against conservation. Whereas if we had a system like one I'll describe in a second, where we actually assigned a value to water and actually gave the individual users exclusive access to specific allocations of water, what we would see is that as the water levels declined, the value of the remaining allocations would get higher and higher and higher, and that the economic return, the economic incentive to conservation would get greater and greater as a drought got deeper and deeper. Now, the other problem is not just how we allocate water in terms of the rights, all right? The other issue is the problem of how we value water. And so I like this picture because this is exactly how we value oil. This is how we send signals to individual consumers about the state of oil supply. They literally designed a sign where 4 times a day you can slide that 4 and that 9 out and put a 6 and a 1 in there. And in fact, as you know, in recent years, where we have had fluctuations of more than 70% in the retail price of gasoline, they've had to change those things a couple times a day. Now, as a consumer, you just drive down the road and you get all the signals you need about the state of the supply of gasoline. And in fact, I know that some of you in this room remember several years ago when it was over $5 a gallon, and we changed the way we drove. We changed where we drove, we changed who we drove with, and remarkably, we changed the vehicles we drove. So there were many years where the Toyota Prius in Ventura County was the #1 selling automobile. Right now, as oil prices have come down, primarily because of the fracking revolution, we actually see that that hybrid vehicle sales are declining and SUVs are back in vogue. So again, the price coordinates behavior, right? And it's a powerful mechanism for doing that. So let's talk about the price of water. Now, it should be very, very high. So this is a cool experiment that was done in the Yakima Valley. They randomly selected half of the parcels in the Yakima Valley to impose a well moratorium on those parcels, all right? So if you were one of the half selected, you could not pump water. You no longer had access to water. And so some economists went in a couple years later and said, well, this is a fascinating natural experiment. Let's look at the land values and compare the average per acre value of the parcels with with a permit and one without. And remarkably, the difference in land values was 30%. And there is no other difference to explain that difference in land values. The only difference, they're geographically the same. They're literally located in some cases hundreds of feet apart, yet one has a permit and one doesn't, and that accounts for a difference of 30% of land value. Okay, imagine 30% of the per acre land value in Ventura County. Land values aren't quite as expensive, but 30% is a huge amount. That tells us that water is incredibly valuable. The price of water should be high. And yet what we see in California is that the price is high in some cases, but it varies tremendously by geography. So here in the city of Ventura, agricultural users in the city of Ventura pay pumping charges. This is a little different than a price of water. They're not going to a market and buying it, they're paying a pumping charge. But they range from $40 to $120 per acre feet at the bottom. That's the lowest price that's paid for a unit of water. Now, we look down the road, not that far, and the city of San Juan Capistrano pays a pumping charge of $1,650 an acre feet. As an economist, I cannot explain a difference that big. Right? I should be able to load trucks full of water, drive them down to San Juan Capistrano, and make millions of dollars. The only reason I can't is because it's illegal. Because I can't transfer my principal, my overlying or riparian water right to anybody else. I have to use the water on my parcel. All right? And so if we could trade water, that difference would disappear. All right? And then of course, you know this, the city of San Diego just entered into a long-term contract with Poseidon desalination plant. $2,200 an acre foot is considered the cost of supplying a unit of desalinated water. So this is one where I struggle. Under the current allocation system, desalination makes no economic sense in California. When you can pump water for $120 an acre foot, why on earth would you pay $2,200 for something like desal? So that's the other part. With a price allocation system for water, all kinds of other conservation mechanisms make sense. You know, wastewater treatment, all right? And in Orange County, it's another thing to do for about $1,500 an acre foot. They treat wastewater, they pump it at great expense back uphill to recharge it into the ground to get it dirty again so we can withdraw it and drink it, all right? And so that's about $1,500 an acre foot. All right, so it costs money. And again, at current water prices in many parts of the state, conservation doesn't make any sense. Now, this is my favorite one of all. So LADWP, as I understand, just allocated more money for this program. So if you retire 1 square foot of turf, they pay you $3.75. We're told it saves 30 gallons of water per square foot. So you might want to guess how much this costs for an acre foot of water. So I'm gonna give them the benefit of the doubt. We're gonna amortize it over 10 years, and I'm gonna charge 0% interest, all right? $4,100 an acre foot. If we assume 4% interest, it's more than $5,000 an acre foot. You could literally build desal plants for half the cost of LADWP's friendly landscape program. All right, here's another one, National Marine Fisheries, for mandated water to flow out of Bradbury Dam. So they have southern steelhead trout like we do here in the Santa Clara River. The National Marine Fisheries mandates 10 acre feet of water go over the dam. How much do you think they pay for that? They pay $0, right? So what this all means is that, first of all, there is no price mechanism. We're not sending signals to consumers. I know this, my water bill in Ventura has gone up a little bit. It has not gone up sufficiently to tell me we're in a critical state of water shortage. Like even, frankly, the system that was announced recently where there will be surcharges if you don't cut back, it doesn't signal to me that we're in a critical state of water shortage. It signals to me, well, I now need to make a cost calculus. Do I want to pay the penalty or not? Just in terms of a price mechanism. There is nothing resembling a scarcity price. As water gets more and more scarce, the price should go up. It should be high when there's little water, and it should be low when there's abundant water. And we don't have anything like that. The other one is that we don't internalize environmental costs. So I believe that the southern steelhead trout is a public good that's worth saving. But it's a public good, which means that we should share the cost that should be borne by the citizens. And that's not how we allocate environmental water. We just curtail use, which means individual users who are affected are the ones bearing all of that cost. And so, no scarcity pricing. We know what this looks like. In the 70s, we did this with oil. And it meant you had to line up on the day of the week that your license plate permitted. I'll concede, at best, I was a newborn in the back seat of one of those cars. So I don't remember this, but I'm told it was bad. And then the other one, we try other mechanisms. Absent pricing, right? We try things like shaming, right? So now the ironic thing is this. This is one at the Bren School of Environmental Science where I do research at UCSB, where they've actually looked at this. And what's really funny is the frowny face here, will, if you get the frowny face, that will discourage some water users. I'm told by other researchers that among affluent communities, that the frowny face is actually a badge of honor. And that it's a status symbol like the car that's in the driveway. And I know we're laughing, I'm not joking. And then actually, in some cases, signaling to affluent consumers of water how much their neighbors are using actually frees them to consume even more. So again, this just speaks to we have to think about incentives and both the unintended and the intended incentives of any policy. Right. And then of course, California legislators, they're coming to the rescue. So we passed laws, the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. This one's an interesting one. It creates the potential for the kind of fundamental change we need. The problem is, my interpretation of SGMA is that it doesn't give all parties an equal place at the table. So to be a sustainable groundwater agency, you actually have to be a public agency. So I know I've heard from irrigators in various parts of the state that they don't feel like they're even invited to the table. So I worry, we'll see how SGMA plays out. Obviously, if the threat of the state stepping in actually frightens local users into changing, then it will have succeeded. I also fear that the minute the state has to step in, they're going to run into a century of water law in California and those principal overlying and riparian rights, and we'll spend the next 2 decades in litigation. So this one, I don't know what to think of it. We'll see how it goes. Proposition 1, I am actually pretty cynical about. So $2.7 billion for water storage. I don't believe we'll ever see another dam in the state of California. And that's primarily because environmental groups oppose those dams. And they have powerful tools in the California Environmental Quality Act and in the Endangered Species Act to stop those, or at least to tie them up in unending litigation. So I think we're likely to spend $2.7 billion and have nothing to show for it. In fact, I'm also told that $2.7 billion does not involve one single shovelful of dirt moving. It's literally just the preliminary work to design these things, get the environmental impact statements done, and that sort of thing. All right, and then of course we're complicated by the Endangered Species Act and Prop 218. There have been very interesting decisions relating to San Juan Capistrano and the city of Ventura. Prop 218 means that we can increase the price of water, but we have to do it uniformly, or at least less non-uniformly as we have in the past. Tiered water rates have to be 218 compliant. And more importantly, we have to express that an increase in price reflects the cost of delivering services. I would argue as an economist, that one's not hard to make. When an aquifer level is dropping, that's a debit against future consumption. That's a cost that should be reflected in the current price. All right, there are other ways, okay? So we don't, and in fact, we have systems to look to. So I'm going to start with this one that I think is a marvel. This is in Australia. They had a drought from 1995 to 2009, the worst drought since settlement. Their total water storage actually was slightly lower than ours is now. But imagine this thing lasted for 15 years. And in fact, there were periods in the drought where agricultural acreage declined by between 60 and 100% in some regions of the country. So there were whole regions where they fallowed every acre of land during the 2 or 3 driest years of the drought. And you might think, well, boy, that doesn't sound like a very good system. But the remarkable thing is that at the end of the drought, almost no farm businesses had failed. And in fact, in a government survey, end of drought survey, 90% of farmers reported that water trading sustained their businesses through the drought. So this is a remarkable system that reveals that the tension between farmers and fish, between cities and farmers, is really the creation of policy. It's not necessary. And that we can actually balance use between those 3 groups. So the way this worked was pretty interesting. In the 1980s, Australia actually, and this is important for Ventura County specifically, they instituted voluntary water trading. So nobody was required to do it. They created a trading system so people, growers and irrigators, could exchange water with cities, but it was voluntary. In 1994, they did something truly radical, and that's they separated the ownership of water from the ownership of land. So they went to growers who had an overlying right, just like they do here in California, and they said, we're separated. You now have a title to your land, and you have a title to your water, and we're giving you a fixed allocation. So they did some hydrology, they calculated safe yield, they divided that safe yield among the acreage, and then they said, you can now go to market, you can own your land, and you can either trade or sell. So you can lease your water or you can sell permanent allocations. That was 1994, the year before the drought set in, and it had remarkable results. So in this system, again, you can produce agricultural products from your water to your economic benefit, or when the supply of water declines, first of all, your allocations decline. So that's kind of what I mean here. Notice it should happen. Your fixed allocation should decline during periods of scarcity. You have less water to work with, but individual units of water are more valuable, and you can continue to produce agriculture, or you can sell the water directly. And they did this to the tune of hundreds of thousands of acres. They sold water to the government for environmental use, and they sold water to cities so that cities could avoid the most drastic water restrictions. And there were a percentage of farmers who did nothing but sell water for the 4 driest years of the drought. They engaged in no agriculture whatsoever. And I think if we did this in California, that's what we'd see. We would still grow strawberries, we'd still grow almonds, high-value crops, but it doesn't make sense to me that alfalfa growers and rice growers can't gain greater economic benefit by selling water than by selling rice and alfalfa. It doesn't make any sense to me. So, the lesson from Australia is that the tension between users is the creation of policy. There are systems of allocation that benefit all 3 uses, and that makes everyone happier, remarkably, okay, including irrigators. All right, so water trading provides economic benefits to buyers and sellers. So cities where it didn't have to undergo the most strict restrictions, environmental needs were met. And this one's really interesting. When the water market opened, there was all this water for sale, and the Australian government stepped in and bought 800,000 acre-feet of permanent allocation for the environment. So I know that's radical. I can't imagine Sacramento paying for environmental water use, but the result is remarkable. Again, it ends the tension between growers and farmers. It means that during the drought, environmental needs will be met, and what it does that's incredible in Australia is that when in times of abundant water, the government leases allocations of water back to irrigators, and it creates revenue for environmental conservation. So they're actually using the asset value of water to raise money for environmental projects. It's incredible, right? And then of course, this is the important one. Water trading actually supports agriculture, right? The other message is the price of water has to go up a lot. Water increased 20-fold in price during the driest years of the drought. And so it's a dramatic price increase, as it should be during times of critical drought. Now you might ask, okay, so that's Australia. Can any of this possibly work in California? And so there's 2 examples. They're not perfect, but they're interesting. So the Kern Water Bank, this is pretty remarkable. It's controversial because the state of California actually handed over the title to thousands of acres of land, free of charge, basically, to a user group in Kern County. So that part's controversial. But this operates within existing water law. Basically, a user group purchased the title to the land overlying an entire aquifer. If you own the entire aquifer, you own the overlying right to all of it, and there's no common pool problem. And so they fallowed all of the agricultural lands. They turned it actually into a now world-famous wildlife bird refuge, and then they engaged in water trading. They built, I don't remember the exact amount, they built infrastructure to the tune of, built some infrastructure in terms of recharge wells, pipelines to move water, and then they started taking deposits. So if you're a municipal water district, or if you're an irrigator, and you have an allocation of water, either that you have overlying right to, or an allocation, an appropriative allocation from the state, you can actually deposit it in their bank for a deposit fee. And then during the drought, nobody can touch that water. You own it, so you can pump it back out during a drought, or even better is you can sell it to someone else, and someone else can pump it back out, and they pay a withdrawal fee to the bank. All right, so it's a pretty remarkable system. And the price of water has gone up more than 60% in the Kern Water Bank just in the last couple of years. The Scott River Water Trust is another remarkable one. So this is up in Northern California, the Scott River Valley. Here, a group of environmentalists actually formed a nonprofit organization. They built an electronic marketplace, and then they went to irrigators up in Northern California and started paying them to leave water in the stream. So they were paying them not to pump water out of the stream, and it leaves stream flows for coho, chinook, steelhead. And so they are using that money to protect species. And again, this operates within existing California water law. So the lessons of California water markets are these, right? If you can't purchase an entire aquifer, you need to actually adjust water rights, which can only be done by a court-mediated process. Adjudication has real promise. Adjudication can clearly define, you need something to trade for a market to work. You need exclusive access to an allocation of water, and the adjudication process does this. It defines allocations in a cooperative legal environment, all right? Other than adjudication and litigation, I can't think of a way to break down the current use it or lose it system. All right, without adjudication, unless Sigma frightens users into compliance, we're going to see litigation, which might be the same thing. This is the other lesson directly from Sari Sommerstrom, who spoke at UCSB. Whatever you do, don't work with anyone in Sacramento. Right? The other lesson is that the price of water has to go up a lot, right? The price should be high when water is scarce, and the price should be low when water is abundant. Now, Ventura County, I think, is especially hopeful. We're a great candidate for water trading. And the reasons are, first of all, we have an abundance of groundwater. So in other parts of the state, the Central Valley, the big issue is conjunctive use. If you're diverting water out of a stream to recharge a groundwater basin, and I understand we do this with the Santa Clara River, there's so many downstream users, it's not clear, is that an appropriative right? Is that a riparian right? What is it? Because we're balancing the tension between groundwater and surface water, and a unit of surface water that's removed is ultimately a unit of someone else's groundwater that's removed. We don't have as many conjunctive use issues. And the other thing that's great about groundwater, and for the west part of the county here, I'm told we're 81% groundwater, right? You go up to Simi and Thousand Oaks, it's a different story. But you need very little infrastructure. Some of the water market now, they do this in the Santa Paula Basin, which is an adjudicated basin. You don't even have to build infrastructure in order to transfer water allocations. You can do what's called an in-kind transfer. I pay somebody not to pump over there, and I pump over here. We're sitting on the same body of water. We don't need elaborate infrastructure like they did in the Kern Water Trust to move water around. And so our groundwater makes us an excellent candidate for water trading. The other one here is that the ratio between urban and agricultural use is favorable. It's tough to negotiate when one user group uses tremendously more water than another. Here, the ratio is actually much closer than in most other parts of the state, which I think is favorable. And then this one, we could follow an Australian system. We could, notwithstanding Sigma, which imposes some deadlines on us, we could implement trading gradually and voluntarily. We actually have policies in place. Emergency Ordinance E and the use of the irrigation allowance index, all right? For example, we could say if irrigators produce at a level less than the irrigation allowance index, you can trade the difference between the cap and what you're actually using. But conditional on you actually have to meter your water use. You don't have to trade. You can just follow the policies that currently exist. But we can implement this gradually and voluntarily, just like they did in Australia. And as an economist, I predict that water trading would win out. That's what we see in other parts of the world, and I think it would hold true here. If we gave them something to trade, trading would be implemented. So it doesn't have to be an all or nothing proposition. All right? And the other one is in Ventura County, we have the political will and strong leadership. And actually, this one's a question. that I ask you. And I'm not pointing fingers. I mean this genuinely. Do we have the political will and the strong leadership? And so with that, I welcome your questions. Yes?
In Australia, during the period where farms were fallowing their land and selling their water,
Yep.
what about third-party impacts such as farm labor and packing houses? Was the money available in order to offset those?
Yeah, and I'm not aware that there were any rules governing this behavior, but my understanding is that farmers have an interest in maintaining a labor supply. They didn't know when the drought would end and when they could resume production. So those that completely fallow land, in many cases, actually maintain staffs, paid employees, because they were generating more revenue under the water trading than they previously had been under agricultural production. Yes?
So likewise, in Australia, when urban and ag allocations were reduced, were environmental allocations reduced as well?
This is a great question. So, yes is the answer, yes. So by the same proportional system. And this one's pretty interesting. And again, just to mention some of the problems I see in California is that environmental use seems to play by slightly different rules. 2015 was the first year that environmental allocations in California were cut. So many of the people in the room who are irrigators know that agricultural water use allocations were cut back in the 90s. So beginning 1996, when we had above average rainfall, they were only getting 70% of water from the state water project. So their allocations have been cut for more than 2 decades. Obviously, in the last few years, they've ratcheted down in urban and agricultural allocations. This is the first year environmental water use has been cut. A really interesting one, I had the slide about the Bradbury Dam at Lake Kachuma. So the existing law says that when total water storage drops below 30,000 acre feet, they must cut in half the environmental water release from the Bradbury Dam. And NIMS has just refused to do it. And they're still, even though for more than a year they've been below that level, they're still pumping 10 acre feet a day. And Goleta Water District, the general manager told me they are considering litigation because it is now Goleta Water District's water that they own that's being flushed to the ocean. Water they stored there previously. Yeah?
China is now a net exporter of rice.
Okay.
Why aren't they growing their own alfalfa?
So what I'm told is simply that the price of water is such that you cannot economically grow it. It's cheap. Let me put it this way: it is cheaper to import it, to have tanker ships or pull up and unload alfalfa than it is to grow it with the existing resources in China. It's literally cheaper. And again, that tells me we're not properly valuing water. Another question? Yes, sir.
Thanks. I've been to China 23 times. So
Yep.
I know what they're doing. I know why. That question is easy.
Okay.
Because there's a lot of land South China that's a lot of water.
Yeah.
And it's scattered. You can't grow alfalfa there.
Because it's too
They
wet.
have to dig areas to drain the land to build on.
Yep.
Up north, there is no water. There's very little water. Look
Yep.
at Beijing. I haven't seen it rain in months.
Okay.
So
Yeah,
it's much
and-
more difficult.
And that pattern obviously holds here. You know, where we grow alfalfa, it's usually the desert. Drive 395, and you can see they don't use center pivot. They use irrigation though, and we're literally growing alfalfa in the desert. Yes, sir.
My question will be at the end of my statement.
Uh-huh.
You are talking to a bunch of people who are interested in water and
Yep.
saving water,
Uh-huh.
but the highest position that you find in this audience is probably 2 or 3 council members
Okay.
and some reps from our local Congress.
Yep.
Do you get a chance to talk to a higher authorities? Because the last bullet on there
Yep.
is where you need to talk to.
Yeah. So first of all, I'm going to throw that question right back at you. Are you all talking to your political leaders? I'm just one economist, but I will say this. And I'll say I am an economist, right? So they can find someone else who tell them the opposite. So nonetheless, I will say this, through the Center for Economic Research and Forecasting, we are definitely trying to have a voice. In fact, if I can shamelessly promote, tomorrow night in Newbury Park, I'm working with a documentarian who made some wonderful movies. My favorite, The Princess Bride, is a generational cult classic. But he also made Stand By Me, When Harry Met Sally. He's retired and he produced a wonderful drought documentary called Eyes in the Sky. You can see this on Vimeo. I recommend it. Send it to others. It respectfully tells the story of the drought from all sides. It's respectful of environmental users, It's respectful of irrigators, and we're using it to start a community conversation. So this will be our third screening. We do an hour-long town hall, and it's a conversation to get people aware and to get them starting to talk to their politicians. So we're trying. Yes, sir.
How much does the price of food go up in Australia when they fallowed all
Yeah,
these
well,
fields?
so that's a great question. So food prices did temporarily go up, but not as much as you would expect. And again, I'll talk about it here in terms of California. I think what you're going to see if we engage in water trading is, first of all, rice and alfalfa production will cease during times of real drought. All right, and so that actually means as an input to if your cows are feeding on alfalfa, you might see an increase in the cost of beef. But most of the high-value produce that we're seeing will not be impacted that much. We're still going to grow strawberries. We're still going to grow almonds, pistachios, that sort of thing. And in fact, remember that under a trading system, irrigators own a fixed allocation of water. So they can produce, so their own water doesn't go up as an internal cost to themselves. It goes up in value, and they have to decide, am I going to sell it or am I going to continue to grow? So I don't think the produce section in Vaughn's will be hit hard. Right? And then again, any increase we see in beef prices is going to be temporary. And by the way, we already impact beef prices through ethanol mandates and all kinds of other stuff. Yes, sir.
If you cut back because of alfalfa, no feed,
Yep.
on beef, it's not just short term, because a lot of beef can be sold off or be used.
Okay.
They have to recover that over not just 1 year.
Yep, sure.
So it is a longer term effect
Okay.
than you're thinking.
Okay. Yes.
What set the value of the water? Was it just the market, or was it set by some board?
No, great question. So the premise of Australian water markets is a radical one, especially standing here in California, and that is that water users are best equipped at the local level to make complex decisions about allocation. And so it is the market that sets the price of water. Anyone can go to market and purchase an allocation of water, whether you're an irrigator, an environmental group, the government, a local water district. And so the market sets that price. And again, this is what we do with coffee beans, which on the world market went up over 70% because of a drought in Brazil in 2014. But this is what we do with every other thing. Yes, sir.
Is there much alteration of the distribution system in order to accommodate this new setup? Because I know that we have some areas that are purely surface water users and
Yep.
other areas are...
Yeah, so again, this is really complex in places like the San Fernando Valley, I'm not the San Joaquin Valley. I'll say this, so the San Joaquin Valley already has infrastructure that we don't have. So the Kern Water Trust, I should look up this number, it didn't have to build as much as you might think. They built $35 million of infrastructure for the Kern Water Bank to function. So that's an entire aquifer, $35 million. So it's less than I would have guessed. But that's also because San Joaquin Valley, they have access to the State Water Project, and they're able to tap into existing infrastructure. So where that infrastructure doesn't exist, there needs to be groundwater for this to work, because groundwater aquifers are an amazing transfer system in themselves. You had a question?
Yeah, the argument that, or the presentation that you set forth with market trading for water, urban versus farm is certainly compelling. But someone earlier asked a question about what they did with the farm workers.
Yeah.
I mean, do you really think that that is possible, that we could achieve something like that here, or would we have enormous up in arms with jobs?
Yeah. Well, I'm not. So again, I'm not a labor economist, but I'm open to the possibility that there can be policies that actually affect the distributional effects on farm workers. I'm totally comfortable with that. Yes.
Do you know how much the urban water prices now in Australia? I suppose.
Yeah, they went up. I don't have a multiple. I know it was like double or more. So it was significant. Again, they came down as soon. And I'll tell you this. I'll tell you what the actual price of water was more broadly. I don't know about residential water rates specifically, but it went up by 20-fold. And that is because prices went from $25, this is Australian dollars an acre foot, to 500 Australian dollars per acre foot. during the dry series drought. It's a 20-fold increase. It came back down, and it's not 25, but it's less than 50. So it came back down swiftly. Yes, sir.
So Australia is an island nation, and they imposed their model on the entire country, entire island.
Okay.
Could you impose a model similar to theirs in Ventura County alone, or would you have to impose it upon the state of California?
I didn't mention that in 2004, Australia liberalized water markets further, and they actually allowed trading across state lines and allowed trading across aquifers. And as an economist, that one I started to say, wow, hydrologically, how do you do that? And I assume moving waters, but this can be done at the basin level. And it can even be done like Australia did voluntarily. And so it does not need to be done system-wide. And in fact, we see this with the Kern Water Trust, that it's just one aquifer. All right.
Very much. I originally thought when Kelly told me about you being a speaker, this was going to be boring as hell. But you actually did a pretty good job. So well, you know you said that. You said it's going to be a boring one, but we need to have it anyways. All right, so we're not getting together again until September, and it's a little bit of a break here because of the way things work out at the Reagan Library. Any announcements that anybody has about anything coming up that you want to talk about? Yes, sir.
On June 27th, Saturday from 10 to 2, Assemblymember Jack Irwin and the City of Thousand Oaks are co-sponsoring Defeat the Drought Water Conservation Expo. We're going to have a few dozen vendors that have everything from more efficient plumbing fixtures to sport court for turf removal and nurseries and such. We'll have workshops going on HOA, the new regulations and the changes in the law, biochar, lose the lawn, gray water. We're very excited about this. We're also going to have a question and answer panel for the public. The City of Thousand Oaks is co-sponsoring, and we are anticipating high turnout. If anyone is interested at all in being involved, I look around, I see a lot of faces of people who are already involved. But if you wanted to table, or even if you just have some materials, it's an educational event. We're really focused on education because we believe in the long term, people choose the right thing when they know. So if you have any educational materials or anything that you like, send it to us and we'll provide it. And it's a good chance to interact directly with the public as there's this emerging consciousness about the drought. So thank you.
Finally, somebody had an announcement. Anybody else? Hearing none? Thank you all for being here, and thank you for our guest speaker and good questions and all that other stuff. And see you soon. Goodbye.